important to take those calculated bets. Marketing is not about doing what you did yesterday or the day before. See, marketing is about the four P's, right? It's about product, price, place, and promotion. It's not only about promotion. Retention rates are materially different at 10 minutes. If you make it instantaneous, if you make it such that customers don't have to think, it unlocks use cases that one would never have thought of. Be clear about who you are as a brand. When you're in a company for 11 years, you have to live with the consequences of your decisions. So being abreast of, okay, what is happening in the world and what you need to do, and taking calculated bets. I think the biggest risk is not to take a risk.
Hey there, welcome to Marketing Mavericks with IndieFolio. Today we have Anand Bhaskaran with us, who's a marketing leader at BigBasket. Anand started off as an engineer. He was in BITS Pilani, and then he spent several years as an engineer, a techie, and an analyst before he jumped into marketing. He is one of the folks who's behind the category creation of Q-commerce in India, and we talk a lot about career transitions and a lot of advice for marketers today. Thank you so much for your time and welcome to the podcast, Anand. I want to immediately take you to your BITS Pilani days, right? I think there are so many folks I've interviewed in this particular podcast series who are engineers who've turned into marketers. And I believe you did computer science in BITS. Take me back to those days, right? I think you what I could see a lot in that particular part of your life was you really focused doing on many internships, right? And I often hear, questions from young folks that are internships important? How do you approach an internship? So take us back to that time when you were studying engineering and how you really approached your first few internships.
Yeah. So, as far as internships are concerned, BITS Pilani arranges for internships themselves, so you don't have to do much. So, I did my first internship at Indian Overseas Bank, and the way you pick, at least the first internship is you just pick the place where you're from. So, I'm from Chennai, so Indian Overseas Bank was based in Chennai, and that's what I picked. It was mostly fun. I don't remember that we did too much work. I mean, it was a lot of friends, and we just had a great couple of months. The second internship that we did was in HP Labs, Hewlett Packard Labs. That was a brilliant experience. It was a 6 month internship in 2005. And what I remember now is that we were trying to do things like speech to text and text to speech, which are all very, today it's run of the mill, it's very common. But in those days, we were trying to do all of this on a Palm device. So Palm was, one of the smartphone manufacturers back in the day. So we were trying to do, some of these things like speech to text, text to speech on Palm devices. So it was interesting. I mean, and no one thought. I mean, we certainly didn't imagine that those would become so mainstream today. But yeah, that's what we were working on.
Very cool. I think you really picked a particular area you thought you'd be good at. Then I think you also did a lot of research analysis. And then I think as a business analyst, you spent those few years, I think almost first 7 years, if I'm not wrong, in these roles. And I think somewhere there you decided, or at least you got an opportunity to do marketing, right? Um, before we get into the story of how that happened, can you tell us, like, how does somebody really decide what to focus on, right? When people make a switch, the biggest fear young people have is, I spent 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever in this category. If I do something new, I'll start again from zero. So my experience will go waste, my package will be lesser, the competition or my competitors, etc., or my colleagues rather, would be, having a certain trajectory. I'm basically wasting the first few years of my life, right? So how do you really deal with that looming question you have, and how did you decide that, okay, maybe it's time for switches in various parts of your journey?
Sure. See, I think, Kaman, what I've realized is in general, if you can stick to a function, or if you can stick to a company for many years or decades, if at all you can do that, it's actually great. because I think you build credibility within you build learning within, whichever functions you choose, and you build credibility within the org. So if you can do it, I think it's actually great. However, I think, see, some of these are very individual dependent. So sometimes, in my case, I felt I was in finance for 5 years, and I felt while the analytical part was interesting, I wanted to do something which was a little bit more creative as well. So something like a balance between creative and analytical work. And so I tried different things. In fact, I tried education for a while. Um, and then stumbled upon e-commerce, and that's worked out. But I don't know. I think it's a very individual decision, and there are trade-offs. I mean, there is no easy answer or a general answer. I think it depends on the individual and where they are at. Got it. Yeah, and I would also certainly say that if you can work for a good brand or a good company for many years, I think that's also it's also a good option.
I think another apprehension, right, people have is, let's say I have 7 years of work ex in something, and there is somebody else who has 7 years of work ex in marketing, probably, right? Probably the company would always choose them over me, and then they feel that I'll never be really able to impress and get hired beyond a point. I think in your case, you were in Urban Ladder as a business analyst, and you got an opportunity to turn into marketing. So why do entrepreneurs and founders or even companies think that way? And if I'm somebody who wants to, let's say, hop into marketing, I have a certain amount of years of experience and I want another role, what's your guidance on how do I go about doing that?
See, it's a tough question, Kavan. I think, see, what I would say is, at least startups or smaller companies are, while what you're saying may generally be true. I mean, obviously, if you're hiring someone for a marketing role, especially for a senior marketing role, you will probably want people with experience. Um, but I think if you want to gain entry into a function or an area, I think there are enough companies, and it's a question of reaching out to relevant folks and hoping that it works out. Because I think if you're interested, if you have the skills, it's a question of figuring out someone who can give you a chance. And I don't think there's again an easy answer to that. It's a question of trial and error and hoping that it works at some point, is what I would say.
After I think you made that switch and you joined Big Basket, you spent what I think a decade plus in Big Basket.
Yeah, it's been almost 11 years at Big Basket now.
Almost 11 years. So after spending over a decade now in marketing, can you answer the question, is marketing for the analytical brain or the creative brain? I think you kind of said it's both, but if I'm somebody who's trying to pursue marketing, do I need to be very good with numbers or very good with ideas? Is there something I should over index myself more on?
I think it's good to have a balance. In fact, I think three skills are helpful. And again, it depends on the role. In some roles, some skills are more emphasized than others. But I would think of it as three circles. One is, of course, the creative part. The second is analytical, and the third I would also add in is technology, like understanding technology. Um, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about where each of these skills come in, right? I think creative is, it's helpful, right? It's, you're trying to communicate ideas to an audience, and the more creative, the better. So I think creativity is certainly required. Um, the second part is analytical abilities. And see, as a marketer, what are you trying to do? You're trying to deliver growth for the organization, right? You're trying to build salience for the organization, and you're trying to build, thought leadership. You're trying to build revenue growth. And I think when you're trying to do that, it's necessary to have some linkage between your activities and the outputs, right? And the outputs could be, in some cases it is revenue. In other cases, it is mind metrics like awareness or top of mind or consideration and things like that. Or it could be thought leadership, right?
Yeah.
So you have, outputs and you have inputs, and relating the inputs to the outputs is where, analytical ability comes in. And it's not rocket science. I think even if one is very creative and one believes that, you're not very great at numbers, it's not rocket science. I think it can be picked up. What I would suggest is, I mean, it's best not to be completely shy of either, right? There's no point, saying that, hey, I'm not creative or I'm not numbers oriented. I think one should know enough that that you can manage. So I think that is analysis. The third part, which is probably not talked about much, is technology.
Mm,
And technology comes in especially in maybe I would say two areas. One is performance marketing. You need some understanding of I don't know, things like in SEO you need an understanding of say things like how HTML works,
mm,
how a Google bot crawls your website, things like that. You need a little bit of understanding of how event feedback gets sent from your app or website to a Google or a Meta. So things like that. I mean, again, it's not very advanced technology, but you need to have a handle of it enough so that you can brief your technology team or your product team appropriately. Um, and increasingly, the other area where technology is coming in is everything to do with Gen AI,
mm,
right? So Gen AI is of course used to make creatives, but it can also be used to improve your workflows. So, for example, one of the areas that one of our teammates has developed Gen AI or used Gen AI for is so we send roughly around 300 plus push notifications in a month,
mm.
right? I I mean, not every customer does not get 300. It's because we have segments, etc. In total, we send out 300, of which the customer receives a certain fraction. Now, to manage all of these, so given a particular segment, given a particular creative, we have a workflow that populates a campaign in our push notification tool. So things like that require a little bit of
Right.
understanding of technology. So net, I would say there's creativity, there is analysis, there is technology, and a good balance of the three can help. And depending on the role, you'll have certain areas where you're supposed to be stronger at. But I think having a balance generally tends to help.
Awesome. I think thanks for breaking that down so well. You often, use, I think your constrained. You often use your numbers to kind of constrain the creativity, then come up with an effective idea, and then prove the ROI. And then I think being more efficient today is so much more easier with the use of Gen AI. So I think that's fantastic, and I think we'll touch upon that in some time. But coming back to the big basket piece, right? So uh, you spent over a decade, as we discussed, and if you open an Instagram of a millennial or a Gen Z person like me, the usual advice given these days is don't stick to a company for too long. There's no incentive to it. You'll always hop, you'll always get those appraisals faster. So can you tell your perspective, right? Why did you stick for so long, and then what's the incentive to really be with a company for a long time, as high as a decade?
See, with that, I think one caveat I would always add is that career paths are very individual. It's just very
Yeah.
difficult to give general advice to anyone. So I think for some people it may, in fact, even I've changed jobs several times in the early part of my career, and that time it seemed like the right thing to do, and somehow I've been here for 11 years. So I don't think there is one optimal path or approach for everyone, right? With that said, um, I think what this 11-year journey has given me is maybe two, three things. One is when you're in a company for 11 years, you have to live with the consequences of your decisions.
Mm,
So if you made a really bad decision, you're still handling it 1 or 2 years later or 3 years later. So I think it gives you that ability to make decisions and see how that plays out over the longer term.
mhm,
I think
mhm.
and that has everything from hiring to decisions you make on media mix, everything you can make decisions and see how that plays out over the longer term. And I think that's
Absolutely.
probably been one of the big um, benefits to me. That is one. The second is in my case, right? I think when I joined, we were creating the category of online grocery. So I think the challenges at that point were quite different. So we were
Mm,
trying to make it, how do you move from early adopters to, a mass market? So
mhm,
at that time, for example, one of the things we did was, have Shah Rukh Khan as a brand ambassador back in
mm,
2015. So just addressing the mass market and a bunch of things to address the mass market, right? So that was the first phase. During COVID, let's say in 2020 to 2021, 2022, we were in a situation where we had excess demand. So we had
mhm,
more demand than we could service.
Mhm.
And then it was a question of not creating demand but ensuring that we're telling customers that hey, this is why we are, it'll take time for us to service demand, being transparent about things and things like that, right? So that was the COVID period, and throughout all of this, just ensuring that our brand reputation and trustworthiness never erode. I think that was the second phase.
Mhm.
And we were also very much in the spotlight during COVID. So just ensuring that as a brand and as a company, we get through that with our heads held high. So that was the second phase. The third phase over the last 3 years has been, the advent of quick commerce, and for us, it's been, changing the business model or changing the reconfiguring our supply chain to, get into quick commerce, and also with entrenched players in quick commerce. How do you carve out a space for yourself? How do you challenge entrance competition? I think that's been the third phase. So it's been interesting in different phases, and at all times, since I've been here for so long, it's living with the consequences of your decisions and learning from them. That's what has been interesting for me.
Makes sense. You spoke about how you joined Big Basket in a time which was a category creation phase for it, right? And I think generally today Q-commerce has blown up so much. Many entrepreneurs who are starting their companies, tune in. They often are not able to afford, marketing directors in the start. So they are marketers or CMOs for that phase of the company, and they're trying to build an intuition. So I wanted to just ask you, for anybody, let's say, who's building in the Q-commerce space, it could be various aspects, maybe directly D2C, could be a facilitator, etc. Um, what's generally your take on kind of doing a 0 to 1 in such an industry, especially from a marketing standpoint? Does it make sense? Is it already too cluttered with these big players? Is there scope? How do you really shine out and differentiate as per you?
Yeah. So I think, Kaman, what I would say, I mean, of course, the specific answers are different depending on whether you're, for example, if you're trying to do start a quick commerce vertical,
Hmm.
um, that's the answer would be a little different from, if, let's say, if you're a D2C player trying to sell into quick commerce. I think the answers are different, but I think what is common is, I think one is understanding the dynamics of quick commerce and what matters to customers in quick commerce. I think clearly 10-minute delivery matters,
Hmm.
right? And I think the reason that everyone in the industry has converged to 10-minute delivery as opposed to even 15-minute or 30-minute is retention rates are materially different at 10 minutes,
Hmm.
right? So I think, I think just the fact that 10-minute delivery really matters. I think remembering that is first. Second is, um I think if with respect to vertical specific QCOM, I think I think the thing to think about is the existing players are already really good. So if you're doing vertical quick commerce, you have to provide something that's materially different or materially better.
Hmm.
So I think it's worth thinking about what that dimension is along which one wants to be materially better. Is it selection? Is it service? Is it something else? Is it quality? I think that those things are worth thinking about. Um, what else? I think third is, I think the nature of quick commerce is worth remembering, which is that you can experiment. So if something takes off, it takes off very quickly. So for example, one of the things we've realized is people are very happy to buy electronics or
Hmm.
gold coins in quick commerce, and if they are willing to buy electronics or or gold coins, and increasingly, I mean, we've been piloting large appliances, so things like washing machines and
Hmm.
TVs, and there's pretty good interest even in those. So I think the categories that will work in quick commerce it's a very open question at the moment, and it's surprising what has worked. So I think keeping an open mind, trying to experiment, figuring out what works with customers, I think that probably is a good mindset to have regardless.
Interesting. So let's say I have a business already and I'm making anything and I'm shipping it and it's taking a day to go. Are you suggesting that if that delivery for any product category became 10 minutes, the retention would be higher?
I so again, what we have seen with every product category that we have is that, okay. In fact, not even getting into that, I think if you can do 10-minute delivery, there's a high chance that it unlocks demand that hitherto one has never seen. I'll give you one example, right? In fact, today we were talking to the folks in our electronics category, and one of the interesting things he was pointing out is that earlier when you have a large apartment complex during Diwali, you would have some apartments decorated with fairy lights, right? Maybe a certain percentage. Say, let's for argument's sake say 10% of houses have fairy lights.
Mm.
Today with quick commerce, that has become maybe 60 to 70% of apartments having fairy lights,
Wow.
right? So it unlocks new use cases that you hitherto wouldn't have thought of. So I think that's the way I would say one should think about it. And in general, I think the bigger meta learning for me, Kavan, has been that if you unlock convenience, at a completely different level, if you make it instantaneous, if you make it such that customers don't have to think, it unlocks use cases that one would never have thought of.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
In
You
fact,
know,
a couple of very interesting examples, right? Over the last couple of weeks, we've had to order suitcases, and I mean, I think there's nothing that stopped us from ordering with a 1 or 2 day delivery time. But we ordered a couple of times, and we got it in maybe 10-15 minutes. So I think it's just once you get used to 10 minutes, it just unlocks new use cases, and that's probably the biggest learning.
correct, correct. I want to now ask from the shelf space perspective. I think whenever I talk to somebody who wants to list themselves on QCom, there's like a battle, right? It takes too long sometimes and it's really hard. So if I'm building something and I want to make Q-commerce a big part of my go-to market, what's a smart way for us to get considered by players like you?
I think. I mean, in general, I don't have too much insight into this, but I'll share what I do. I think one of the things in general that I've noticed is I think category managers are generally willing and interested in experimenting with new brands.
Mhm.
They are. I think because they. I think all of us also recognize that. Um, Customers are interested in new brands, interesting brands, and therefore if you can carry them, then it gives you a little bit of an edge, right? So I think category managers are naturally trying to onboard new brands. I
Mhm.
think what it takes for a brand is it helps to have maybe differentiated products, differentiated a strong brand, differentiated products. I think that combination makes it interesting for category managers.
Got it.
So I
Got
think maybe let me think of an example, right? Uh, Maybe if you have, let's say, the latest new phone, right? Or let's say consumer accessories. If you have, phone is probably not a good example, but if you have, I think there are many of these new age brands that are developing electronics. Boat is well known, but I think there are others as well emerging. So if you have an interesting new product, I think category managers are inclined to try it out.
it.
And I think it's relatively, I mean, obviously there's a shelf space constraint, but it is possible to just try out introduction of a new product or category in let's say a particular region, and then if it takes off, then you sort of expand. So I think, yeah, I think the key thing I would say is interesting products and good brands, and then category managers are interested in trying them.
Got it. Got it. Very interesting. I want to now jump into I think the
And
last part.
sorry, yeah, sorry. I just realized one more thing. I think just to add to that, Kaman, is I think there are also some customer trends, right? Broad trends in society, and I think brands that piggyback on that generally
Well, yeah,
have greater chances. So, for example, I think there is whole trend of eating healthy, eating organic on the food space. So, I think that's one trend. The other trend is on in beauty. There is this trend of products that are gentle on my skin, right? With natural ingredients. So if you are riding on those society trends, I think that generally gives a better chance as well.
got it. Got it. Makes a lot of sense. I feel searchability, novelty are all things you should really know well, and you do well.
And
I think.
also,
Hmm,
yeah, sorry, as I speak to you, I'm getting more and more
yeah.
ideas. But I think one of the things with quick commerce is the more topical, the better.
Hmm,
So, for example, I don't know, like if there's Valentine's Day and you're able
Mm.
to introduce as a manufacturer a new SKU that works really well for Valentine's Day, that's great.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Um, so things like that. How can you be more topical? How can you be more part of the culture? How can you ride on societal trends? I think those are some of the questions that if you can answer them well, I think that gives you a greater chance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to now jump into the last part of the conversation, right? And one of those aspects I want to definitely touch upon is AI. Now we're at a time where we know we have to embrace it, but I think AI is being spoken about in various fashions. As somebody who's obviously has a technical background, is also in a tech company, is also doing various things. I'd love to know from your view, what do you think is very underrated in AI with respect to marketing today, and what do you think is really overrated in AI with respect to marketing?
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard to find anything that's underrated in AI because it seems to be, everything is very highly rated. But maybe I'll give you maybe how one could think about it, right? And again, even my thoughts are still developing. But here's how I would think about it. And maybe we can break it down by the functions,
Hmm.
right? So if you look at brand, what is the job to be done on brand? I think one is to, be clear about who you are as a brand.
Hmm.
That's the number one job. AI, I don't know, maybe it can help a little bit, but I think it's mostly a question of you knowing as a company what your soul is. I think
Hmm.
that I'm not so sure AI can help too much there. Maybe in some parts, like if you're doing customer research to summarize things, maybe, certain things on the margins that can help with. But I think knowing who you are is probably something that it can't help with too much, in my opinion. The second is, knowing who you are and how you want to appear to the world. Are you expressing those in creative ways and in a way that stays true to your brand? I think AI can certainly help there,
Hmm.
both in terms
Hmm.
of trying out new creatives, um, as well as, I'm sure there are ways to ensure that out of the hundreds of creatives that you put out in any given year, what's the adherence to your brand guidelines, etc. I think there are ways to use AI for that, right? That's how I would think about AI for brand. In terms of performance marketing, there is one very clear area to use AI in, which is, so in performance marketing, increasingly, Kavan, it is automated in the sense that you set an objective, you pump in a bunch of creatives, you set event feedback, and then the algorithm runs and does its job. And one of the things that we and many other marketers have also realized is that the more the creatives you feed into the algorithm, the better.
Hmm.
And the more diverse, in fact, one of the realizations of late is the more diverse your creatives, the better
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah.
there's a way to use AI to make these, make the volume of creatives that you require as well as ensure that they're diverse. So that is on performance. On marketing communications, as I briefly mentioned earlier, there are ways to improve your workflows. So if you're doing, see, I think what is the important thing in marketing communication? It is to be relevant, and it is to be relevant, meaning in terms of creative as well as in terms of timing. So you
Hmm.
want to tell customers the right thing at the right time. So I think there are ways to use Gen AI for that and to improve workflows as well, because you're dealing with a large volume of activities that you're doing. So 300 push notifications means that there's a way for you to use AI to improve your workflows. Um, I think those are three areas, and I think it's helpful to use to figure out, okay, what are the jobs of marketing and where
Hmm.
AI can help in improving each job.
Got
That's
it.
the way I would think about it.
Got it. Everybody's saying AI is going to change everything. I want to ask you, what do you think will not change the next 5 years, right? Because that's a great way for me to know if this is not changing for the next 5 years, I should double down on building expertise
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. I think the way I would think about it, Kavan, is okay. So the things that won't change is, I think, understanding customers. I think it's
Hmm.
still a lot of it is just meeting customers, taking out the time. See, I think all of us, one general thing is all of us are very busy, right?
Hmm.
We have our stakeholders, we have our goals,
Right.
and generally nobody asks marketers to meet customers, right? It's something that
Hmm.
we have to of course, in the FMCG companies and some of the very traditional marketers, there is that impetus, and culturally there's a like understanding that you have to meet customers. but in a lot of companies it's not, and therefore I think one of the big ways, one of the things that won't change is just the direct connect with customers and ensuring that amidst our busy lives we still continue to do that.
Right.
I think that probably won't change. The second is, I think there is still no substitute for you thinking, you connecting the dots, you meeting people, you reading. No substitute for that.
True.
Um, and again, amidst our busy schedules, just taking the time out to think and reflect, that need will always be there, right?
Absolutely.
And the third is, see, building a brand. Uh, it's about two things. It is about knowing who you are and what you stand for, and staying true to it over a long period of time.
Hmm.
So while you're doing a lot of activities, you're doing expressing, you're staying true to culture, you're staying true to, the events of the day or the month. I think knowing who you are, staying true to your brand. I think those are, you know, it still has to be done the old-fashioned way. I think there's no tricks that can help you get over that. So I think those are three things probably that
Superb.
won't really change. Having said that, I would say that it's always good to. Uh, I mean, marketing has changed over the last 20 years, right? While these things have not changed, there are changes. So I think while I would say this, I think workflows will change. The way we approach doing marketing, some of those will change. So it's helpful to stay abreast of that as well.
Absolutely. I think if I can kind of sum up from what I hear is you need to have empathy, you need to have problem framing, and you need to have good taste. I think that really
Yeah,
will kind of help you,
correct,
understand the user, make something which they like and approve that ye chalega. I think that is what at the end of the day, marketing
right.
folks do.
Correct, correct. And at the same time, I think it's helpful to if there's a new trend like AI or any trend for that matter, performance marketing a few years back. I think it's helpful. See, it's always when you're very young, it's like exciting to learn, but as you grow older, it's sometimes becomes a little bit more difficult. But I think it's still helpful to make that effort, and whatever little effort you make helps, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that's what I would say. So just trying to keep learning. Sometimes it may be tough, but just continuing to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. This marks the end of the podcast, and as a parting thought, Anand, I'd love to ask you, if you could advise a young marketer today on what it really takes to be a marketing leader one day. Could you share any thoughts?
Yeah, I think. See, maybe I can talk about what very good marketing leaders that I've seen, what they're good at. Maybe that could be a good way to think about it. I think one is the really good marketers. See, marketing is about the four P's, right? It's about product, price, place, and promotion. It's not only about promotion. So I think
Right.
understanding the product or the business that you're a part of, understanding pricing, understanding distribution, I think those things are really important too. And in
Mhm.
some cases, you're a P&L leader, in which case you control all of them. But in many cases, you're not. You only have influence, or you only are supposed to have influence. So I think, nevertheless, regardless of which case it is, just being aware that marketing is about four P's, and product is really important, pricing is really important, and having an understanding of the business. I think that probably is really, really important. So it's not only about communication; it is about the four P's, and having a good understanding, interest in the business. I think that matters. The second is, uh, I think this combination of creativity and analysis and technology. I think that keeping that going at all times, right? Building on that, I think that the perspective helps. The third is, see, marketing is it's a lot about you having a perspective, but also evangelizing it to the organization, right? Because you're trying to carry people along, and therefore just remembering that as you grow as a marketing leader, this whole the time spent on carrying stakeholders along, I think it's never wasted.
Hmm.
So just carrying people along, sharing, evangelizing things, that's a critical part of the job, and not forgetting that. And fourth, I think the best marketing leaders are, see, you do have to take risks, you have to take chances. So being abreast of, okay, what is happening in the world and what you need to do, and taking calculated bets. I think the biggest risk is not to take a risk. So I think as long as you're clear, you're taking calculated risks. And see, I think organizations also understand. So, management always understands if you say, okay, this bet makes sense, maybe there are some risks, but I'm keeping it bounded, I'll measure the results. As long as you're doing that, it's really important to take those calculated bets. Marketing is not about doing what you did yesterday or the day before.
Correct.
I don't think that works. I think it's about, obviously there's some continuity, but there's also spending time on new bets, trying to figure out what is new, trying to take those bets and risks is really important, because over time you take those bets, you learn, and that's how you develop as a leader and you add value to the organization.
Absolutely. I think some really, really, really golden advice. And what a fantastic note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much, Anand. It was a pleasure to have you, and I hope you had a good time.
Oh, I always enjoy sharing, anything of value to my fellow marketers. And if it's been useful, I'll be like super happy.
100%. And for everybody who's tuned in, thank you so much for staying till the end. If you'd like to hear another marketing leader like Anand, please subscribe to our channels. Thank you.